Well, we're going to have some analysis of some of the things we've been talking about all morning, and we're also going to talk about some of the domestic politics and what's going on in this country. Peggy Noonan is with the Wall Street Journal, of course. Michael Gerson writes a column for the Washington Post, veterans of the Reagan and George W. Bush White Houses, respectively. He was a member of both of those before he became a newspaper reporter. Another veteran, Dee Dee Myers, served as press secretary to President Clinton, is about to head off to Hollywood next month to take over corporate communications for Warner Brothers. She is taking along the guy sitting next to her, who happens to be Todd Purdum, and he is her husband. And he has a terrific new book. In fact, one of the best books I've read this year about the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It is called An Idea Whose Time Has Come, and we'll sure want to talk about that a little. But the first thing I want to talk about, and we'll also get back to Iraq, but Hillary Clinton, I must say, has really taken some heat about her book tour, where she rolled out and, amongst other things, said they were dead broke when they left the White House. Peggy, you had a scathing, if I may say so, review of the book and Senator Clinton's kind of book tour here, and so how is she going to turn this around? Because I don't think this was a very good start for her, if I do say so.
Well, I think this was step one in a many-stepped process. I think Mrs. Clinton and her publishers were probably thinking, look, this is a book tour, this is wonderful, it's our opportunity to go out before select audiences and make an impression. But I think some mistakes were made. I think the impression was not so great. The book got almost universally panned. It does not appear to be selling well or according to expectations. It was an essentially banal piece of work. You know, it wasn't really riveting like some former Secretary of State memoirs and histories. And I think also that Mrs. Clinton found something that was probably a little surprising, and it was that the mainstream media, which scrambled for interviews with her, trying to get the first and the longest, they were not at her feet and they were not at her throat. They were distanced and they were probing, and they gave fresh life to such stories as Benghazi. They got her to say, oh my gosh, I guess this IRS thing is a problem. So there was a little wobbliness that I suspect may have startled Mrs. Clinton and probably reminded her what she already knew, which is that running on a national scale is hard, and she just started running.
So what do you think about it, Dee Dee?
I agree with much of what Peggy said, except I think the book got better reviews than you probably did. But she faced, in writing the book and in selling the book, a dilemma that most former secretaries of state don't face, which is she's still an actor in the public arena, and she is keeping open the possibility of obviously running for president, and that clearly kind of put some fences around what she felt comfortable saying and how she had to kind of talk about her past with one eye on the future. So that was a challenge. And I think they did start out thinking, this is step one. We're gonna treat this like a book tour. We're not going to let it become a political campaign. She's not running for anything yet. And that proved to be much harder than they expected. And so I think she has, she spent 4 years at the State Department, where for the first time she wasn't treated like a politician, and she really liked that. And I think she wanted to keep that platform going a bit longer. And yet, first of all, she's Hillary Clinton, and second of all, this is a political environment. So she stepped back into the political fray, again, trying not to make it be a campaign, but realizing that that's not really possible in this day and age. And being Hillary Clinton, everything's about politics. So I think they have some work cut out for them. It's not too late by any means. This is just the beginning of hasn't declared anything yet, and so it's all fixable. But I think they saw some flaws in the machinery that they need to go back and redress.
Michael, you've worked in the White House. You've also worked outside the White House since you were there with George W. Bush. What do you think this says about Hillary Clinton as a candidate? Is it going to be tougher than maybe some Democrats thought it was going to be?
Well, her sputtering launch, has caused some unfortunate reminders for her. A reminder first, she didn't run a great campaign last time. In 2008, she had a chaotic staff. She had high expectations. She was sometimes clumsy. This is just a reminder to people she's not Bill Clinton in a certain way. She's not a perfect candidate. I think she has a strong resume and background, but she's not a perfect candidate. It's also a reminder that very wealthy people have sometimes a tough time talking about money. Mitt Romney had that problem. Hillary Clinton seems to have that problem without even realizing it. I mean, she explained that she had earned her money through dint of effort. Okay, which sounds like a baroness responding to this this question. So I think she has some tin ear problems she's going to have to work on here. I would only add, she also has some foreign policy problems. What does she distance herself from in the chaos of the Middle East? In her book, she distanced herself from the Syrian policy of the president, which I thought was interesting. The most interesting part of the book, by the way, and a not very interesting book. Does she need to do that on some other issues as events in the Middle East unfold? It's going to be interesting. So.
Todd, I'll give you a chance to.
Well, I think one of the things that the dead broke comment brought out is Mrs. Clinton's longstanding and to some degree understandable resentment about all the years in which her husband was making $35,000 a year as governor of Arkansas. She was the family breadwinner. She remembers worrying about paying for tuition for Chelsea's college, and she does, I think she has a very resentful streak about the years that she sacrificed. And so she does have a kind of tin ear now about she's quite wealthy and makes $200,000 a speech, but she remembers the hungry years, I think, and in some ways that influences her very much.
But why is it that people that go into politics then resent the fact that they're not making very much money?
Well, I think it's
a voluntary exercise.
But you remember, Peggy, all those years ago she complained.
This is not walking to school in the snow.
No, but she complained. I'm not defending her. I'm just saying that years ago she complained to Dick Morris, why can't we have a swimming pool in the Arkansas governor's mansion like normal people do? So it's a long-standing problem for her.
Well, this is like what Arnold Palmer said to Tiger Woods when Tiger Woods talked about how, you know, he was making all this money, and he said, I just can't have a normal life. And Arnold said, well, then give back the money. You'll have a normal life.
It's a good problem to have.
And everybody went on from there. Let's talk about something else here, and that is, this week we saw the president open a campaign to, as I understand it, from what I read about it, to connect with people out in the heartland, to connect with what's going on in real America. And I think at one point he was complaining that he wasn't getting enough publicity about sitting down in a booth in a cafe and talking to a lady about what her problems were. And I'm not sure how much publicity that was appropriate, but that seemed to be, he didn't think he got enough. What's this all about, Peggy?
I don't know. He also said he thought Republicans were, quote, picking on him, which sounded a little bit almost childish. They are picking on you? Here's what I thought. I mean, presidents and their staffs get in antic moments sometimes, and they decide, I know, we're having a lot of trouble. Let's go here and talk about this. Everything the president, it seemed to me, said, talked about, or did in his little heartland visit seemed to show a contrast between what is really happening in the world and people are really worried about, what's happening at the borders, the children, Iraq, the jobs numbers, the economy, and he's having these sort of strange off-point conversations that it seemed not to mesh, and it seemed to me to make him look worse, like someone who actually is detaching and detached.
It also shows some of the paradox of foreign policy polling. So on Iraq and Syria, the president's pretty much doing what Americans want. He's not very engaged, but they don't like the result. His polling numbers are going down. Americans may be ambivalent and disengaged with the world. They don't want a president who is ambivalent and disengaged with the world. There's a difference here. He often cites the polling as saying, I'm focused on what Americans really care about. But they judge whether a president is strong in the world. They judge where their American long-term interests are being served. I think that's a serious problem for him.
Well, Dee Dee, you're going to work for Warner Brothers here. You're acknowledged to be a real expert on communications and helping people to put their best foot forward. What would you, if you were in the White House right now, what would you advise this president to do? Well,
I disagree. I mean, clearly people do want the president to take care of foreign policy, so they don't have to. They don't have to worry about it because they've outsourced it to the president and his team, and that's always been thus. But what they want to know that he cares about them and their problems, and I think this president has been a little hit and miss in that department. When he's campaigning, people feel like he understands their their problems and what's going on in their lives, and they like him. They have generally have had pretty high personal feelings about him, and yet I think he tends to withdraw into the White House a little bit and is not out there talking to people. And I think one of the things that he needs to do more of, and I disagree that he seems attached, is listen. I think you can do both. I think people expect the president to deal with foreign policy and also be concerned about them and their problems. And I think so often we see this president talking, and I'm very happy to hear him listening to people, sitting down with somebody who says, I work really hard, my husband and I work several jobs to try to put food on the table, and we're not getting ahead. I think people want to know that he's hearing from people like them with problems like them. And so it's not the only thing he's doing, and it's not the only thing he's going to do, but it is a campaign season, and they want to know that he hears and understands and feels their pain, to quote another president.
Let me ask you this, Todd, because you've just done this book, and I want to talk about that a little bit, your book on civil rights. But a big part of that book was Lyndon Johnson and how Dee Dee says, the president needs to be listening. A lot of people up on the Hill, both Democrats and Republicans, say the president ought to be listening to them and that he ought to make more of an effort to try to build some kind of a relationship with not just Republicans up there, but with Democrats as well. Is that a fair
Yeah, no, I think the Democrats
comment?
feel very under-tended on the Hill, and the White House has made a concerted effort in the last few months under Dennis McDonough, the new chief of staff, and the new congressional relations shop, to make more of an effort to just set aside routine time every week for the president to reach out to members of Congress. But I think it's fair to say that he did not do enough of that in the first part of his presidency. And one of the things that President Johnson did so well during the fight over the Civil Rights Bill, he called the Southern opponents of the bill not because he thought he'd change their mind, but because he knew he would learn valuable intelligence about what was on their mind. And I think more information is always better information, and President Obama could certainly stand to just pick up the phone and hear what people are thinking.
As you look back on that period, what could today's politicians learn from the politicians of that day? Because they did know one another. They did talk to one another. Yeah. Johnson knew he couldn't pass that bill without Everett Dirksen. What advice should they take away from what happened in 1964?
Well, I guess the principal thing I would say is that just because something seems impossible doesn't mean it's necessarily impossible. The veterans of that bill, the surviving aides to Mike Mansfield, Hubert Humphrey, they all said, we weren't sure this could happen. And because they worked at it and let it play out over many months, let the opponents have their say, the whole energy suddenly changed because they kept their shoulder to the wheel. Politics today is so different. The districts are so different. They're redder and redder and bluer. There's no incentive for bipartisan cooperation. I'm not sure there's really a good analogy that we could bring to bear, but I do think it's astounding that 50 years ago, people basically did the right thing for the right reason, and sort of fundamental decency and common sense prevailed, and I think that's always...
Peggy, we have about 30 seconds left. Will we ever see that day again?
Oh my goodness, maybe we can profitably look at the past and histories like your book. It's one of the things we could all learn from is that Mr. Johnson, who was a Democrat, he got that great legislation passed with Republicans. He had to ignore part of his own party, the Southern Bloc, the Democrats. He picked off the Republicans. They backed him up. Patriotism is a powerful force when honestly and idealistically unleashed by leaders. That's part of what happened, I think, part of what I see in your book.
Well, I hope we can somehow find a way to be more like we used to be in those days. Thank you all very much, and we'll be right back.